I'm Steve Spear. By my institutional affiliations, it's a little bit fragmented. I'm a senior lecturer at MIT where I teach a lot in the executive education program. I'm a senior fellow at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, a senior advisor at the Boston Consulting Group, founder of a software company called SeeToSolve, and I've worked with leaders at a bunch of different institutions and enterprises over the years. Functionally, I'm a field-based researcher, and the work I've done in the field has been captured primarily in two books. One is called Wiring the Winning Organization, which I had the great privilege and joy of writing with a fellow named Gene Kim, and a book that preceded it called The High Velocity Edge. Common to both is trying to explain a paradox. All else equal, you have enterprises which are doing more or less the same work. They're subject to the same operating conditions in terms of rules, regulations, access to suppliers for raw materials, capital equipment. They're looking into the same market space for opportunities, or they have similar missions that they've been tasked by society with achieving. Everything is the same, but the outcomes. And in some cases, it's what you would expect because you look across an entire sector and everyone has similar results in terms of safety, quality, productivity, yield, time to market, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have the standouts. And their performance is off the charts, and it's off the charts on every single possible metric you care about. And so in Wiring the Winning Organization, we try to ask the question, what is different between the standouts, all else being equal, and everybody else? And what we said right in the beginning of the book is that they compete and they create far better conditions in which people individually can express their ingenuity, their innate creativity, and they create far better conditions by which those individual efforts to be creative come together and get integrated harmoniously into a well-choreographed collective action towards common purpose. And as we explain in the book, in terms of creating these really phenomenal conditions in which people can give fuller expression to what they can create and generate and deliver, we start early on, ask the question, well, what are the conditions in which it's very hard to do that, something we label the danger zone, and what are the conditions in which it's much easier to do that, something we can label the winning zone. So the danger zone is all the things we're familiar with. We're presented with situations which are very complex, lots of factors, very little control over the situation. We're under pressure to quickly deliver a solution. The risks of getting the wrong answer might be very high. The risk of actually engaging in this situation might be very high. And not only that, we get very few opportunities to get learning loops, iterations, cycles to say, oh, that didn't work, let me try something else. And so the winning zone is everything opposite that, right? It's simpler situations over which we have more control, that we have more opportunity to iteratively converge on an understanding, the risks are less, so on and so forth. And in the book, we try to explain how does one get from this danger zone down to the winning zone. And we said, well, there are three basic mechanisms. One is, let's just respect people's minds. We're not very good at giving impulsive, reactive answers. I mean, that's fine when we have to know in the moment what to do. Oh, I see a red light, my foot should shift from the gas to the brake. But when we have a new situation, we need time to be contemplative and reflective. And so we call the shifting of conditions in which it's easier to solve problems something we call slowification. And in that we do some reference and acknowledgement of Daniel Kahneman in the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And what we're doing is drawing upon Professor Kahneman and others who say, look, if you really want people to be generative with new ideas, you have to create conditions in which they can think slowly and not have to be impulsive and do fast thinking. So that's mechanism one. The second mechanism is what we call it simplification. And simplification is a set of techniques to take really hard, complex, intertwined, convoluted problems and actually make them easier to solve. And then the third mechanism is amplification. And amplification is just making it readily abundant that you actually have a problem to pay attention to. Now, in terms of the book, we've got 24 some odd cases in it illustrating the points of slowification, simplification, and amplification. I'll give you one case study out of the book. So you remember COVID hits, and ironically, coincidentally, there's a decision across many states that schools have to shut. And coincidentally, that's the irony of it, I suppose, is that schools shut on Friday the 13th of March, 2020. Now, we all understand the consequences now of closing schools, and the longer the schools were closed, the sort of exponential growth in cost and consequence to children who didn't have the academic development, the social development, attention to health and well-being, and all those other things. Terrible thing. So across the country, the number of kids who were out of school come March 13th, 2020 was basically 100%, at least in the public schools. The number of kids who were back in school by September was actually a very small portion. And even by January 2021, it was still a small portion. And if you recall, kids weren't even coming back to school until after the vaccines became more readily available, which was around March, April, May in 2021. So anyway, where does this land? Is that some school districts were able to open, getting kids back in school. So how does that play out? So I'll give you an example. In Wisconsin, in Waukesha County, Menominee Falls School District, at the county level, they started having this realization that we can't keep schools closed, because if schools are closed, parents have to stay home with kids. And if parents are staying home, guess what? That means doctors and nurses and pharmacists and technicians and medical assistants and administrators aren't coming to the hospitals to take care of patients. And the whole reason we had these shutdowns in spring of 2020 is our hospitals were overflowing. So they realized this is a terrible conundrum. If we shut down schools, then we don't have professionals in healthcare, and we haven't really solved the problem we're trying to address of all the intensive care that has to be provided. So at the county level, they start saying, well, what do we know about opening schools? And the answer is, we don't. We don't know how to open schools during an epidemic. And this is where the slowification, simplification, amplification mechanisms come into play. Because at the county level, they say, look, this is too big a problem for us to solve at the county level. They go down to the district superintendents and say, look, we're going to be supportive of you. If we've got financial resources, we're going to share them. If we have information, knowledge, insights, we're going to share them. But you have to figure out how to open up at the district level, because we can't give you meaningful guidance. Now, if you have an insight, share it back with us so we can do the synthesis across to the other districts in the county. Now, at the district level, the superintendents there say, oh, that's great, but opening during an epidemic, we don't really know about that. So what happens there in Menominee Falls, in that county, that the superintendent, a guy named Corey Gallo, he picks up the phone to his principals and says, look, here's the situation. We got to get the schools back open for all these good reasons. We got to do it safely. Thing is, I don't have an answer. So what you all have to do is figure out how to open up your schools. Now, what I'm going to do is at the district level give you resources, give you insights, give you information, whatever and if you have anything else, share it back with me. I'll synthesize it and share it amongst your colleagues. So the principals, after they get this phone call from Corey, there's like, we don't know how to open up a school. So they call the teachers and say, look, what we need you to do is figure out how to open up a classroom, just how to open and run your classroom. And what do the teachers do? They call up the parents and actually engage some of the students, say, how do we run the classroom? Now, how does this all play out? You see, at the county level, thinking about the entire elaborate system of all these districts, all these schools, all these grades, all these children, all these different communities, impossible to come up with policies and procedures that will cover everything. But you get it down to the classroom, you break in this whole big problem down to class by class by class by class. This community, this age group, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 18-year-olds. It's a much simpler problem. So that's the simplification thing. Now, what else comes in is that at the county, at the district, at the school, and then at the class level, it becomes this idea, hey, we're not going to just invent policies and procedures. What we're going to do, we're going to come up with ideas and then expose them to feedback. And this is the slowification. We're going to make sure that we have committed offline time to figure out how to open up a classroom, how to open another classroom, how to have the kids pass in the hallways, so on and so forth. And then, of course, anytime one of these things doesn't work, whether it's the tabletop exercise, the simulation, the pin-up on a board, and certainly when we get schools open, that will be recognized not as something where it's the fault of the student, the teacher, the parent. It's no, that's a problem in the procedure or the policy, and we're going to do another iteration to figure out what's wrong. Anyway, this combination of simplification, break the big problem down into littler pieces, slowification, committed time every day, every week, every month for people to run these experiments, and amplification to make it clear when things are not working. What does that happen? How does that work? Is that come September, the schools in Menominee Falls are opening for their youngest students. By October, they're opening the doors for the rest of the elementary into the middle school, and by later in the fall semester, they're opening up at least part-time in some hybrid fashion for the high schools. Now again, what does that mean? Is that those kids are getting the academic development, they're getting the social interaction, and in fact, by most metrics, their performance went up during that period, whereas the schools where they tried this top-down, unsimplified, unslowified, unamplified approach, those kids stayed out of school 6 months, 12 months, a year and a half with great consequence.